Welcome to Dreams, Delta Waves, and Downloads. Why rest isn't passive, it's where your higher mind speaks loudest. Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 4 of Intuition on Tap. I'm your host, Heidi Jane. So I want to begin by naming something that many intuitive, empathic, and perceptive people have felt for most of their lives, but were never given a name or a language for. So rest is not passive, sleep is not a shutdown, and dreaming is not random mental noise. For people with intuitive, highly sensitive nervous systems, rest is often the moment when the most coherent, integrated, and truthful information finally has space to arrive. If you've ever woken in the middle of the night with a sudden sense of knowing, if clarity has ever landed just as you were drifting off, or if some of your most important realizations have arrived when you weren't actively trying to solve anything, this episode is going to meet you exactly where you are. Because today we're talking about dreams, delta waves, and downloads, and why altered states, accessed through sleep, deep rest, and liminal awareness, are not escapism, but access points to higher order intelligence. One of the biggest misconceptions around altered states is that they represent a loss of consciousness or a checking out of reality. From both neuroscience and intuitive intelligence perspectives, the opposite is true. Altered states don't remove awareness. They simply change the filtering system through which awareness operates. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you're awake and alert in beta brainwave activity, the mind prioritizes the following: linear reasoning, problem solving, time-based thinking, control, and prediction. And these functions are obviously very useful. We all need them to operate in our daily lives, but they're not the only form of intelligence available to you. When the brain shifts into alpha, theta, or delta, the dominance of the analytical mind softens, and a more integrative, pattern-based intelligence comes online. So this is why answers that refuse to arrive through effort often arrive through rest. Not because you stopped thinking, but because you stopped forcing thinking to move in straight lines. Sleep is not a single state. It's a dynamic, cyclical process that moves you through multiple neurological environments across the night, each with a different function. So across a typical sleep cycle, the brain moves through light sleep, deep slow wave sleep, which is delta, and REM sleep or REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement or dreaming. So you repeat these cycles several times per night. And each pass through the cycle serves a different role in emotional processing, memory consolidation, nervous system regulation, and intuitive integration. So for intuitive people, these cycles are not just restorative, they are communicative. Delta brainwaves are the slowest measurable brainwaves, dominant during sleep, the dreamless, deep type of sleep. And sometimes they're accessed during very deep meditation or actually in hypnosis. So in Delta, the thinking, narrating, decision-making inner mind is almost entirely offline. And so from a nervous system perspective, this has a profound parasympathetic activation Because what actually occurs is your heart rate slows, your muscles soften, your cortisol drops, the stress hormone, and cellular repair begins to accelerate. But cognitively, something equally important happens, because the brain shifts from analysis and needing to make meaning and holding on to this meaning-making machine into global integration. Experiences are reorganized, emotional charge is released, and memories are moved from short-term storage into longer-term meaning. Crucially for intuitive people, Delta allows information to be processed without the ego interference. So what that means is you're not trying to get it right or trying to get the answer or need to be in control. And so this is the very reason why insights so often arrive just before you're about to fall to sleep, in the middle of the night, during very deep rest, or immediately upon waking. Because, let's be honest, the information wasn't missing. The mind was just simply too active to receive it earlier. And I get it. You know, in the Western world, we are programmed to be stimulated mentally all the time. We're looking at our phones, we're watching TV, we're downloading YouTube videos, we're on Reels. And so that hyper stimulation is really hard to let go of. But during sleep, this is the easiest time you can access that. Theta brainwaves sit between waking and sleeping. They dominate during daydreaming, hypnagogic imagery, hypnosis, creative flow, and early sleep stages. So theta is where intuition speaks most fluently, not in language, but in images, in sensations, emotional tones, symbolic scenes, sudden whole body knowing, which obviously you guys already know is deeply linked to your intuitive intelligence. So this is why dreams don't explain themselves logically, because, well, they don't need to. Theta bypasses linear reasoning, and it communicates in meaning rather than instruction. For intuitive people, theta is often where guidance arrives, not as a checklist, but as a felt sense of truth that doesn't require justification. So let's talk about REM sleep, the emotional integration and symbolic translation of it. Because it's where vivid dreaming occurs, and it plays a critical role in emotional regulation. From a neuroscience perspective, REM sleep allows the brain to reprocess emotional experiences, reduce emotional charge attached to memories, integrate learning across brain regions. And from an intuitive perspective, REM is where the psyche translates complex information into symbolic language. So I guess you could say that dreams are not necessarily literal predictions, and they are not necessarily literal instructions, but they're more so translations. They translate emotional truth, subconscious material, intuitive insight, and unresolved patterning into imagery that bypasses the rational mind entirely. And this is why a single dream can feel actually more honest than weeks of conscious overthinking. And have you noticed that intuitive people tend to dream more intensely? Many intuitive and empathic people report that vivid dreams, lucid dreaming, emotional intensity in dreams, repeated dream themes, and strong dream recall are actually quite typical. I also like to ask people, do you dream in color? Can you smell in your dreams? Do you taste in your dreams? How is your somatic or physical experience in your dreams? That's also often really great to note too, because none of those things are accidental, because the highly perceptive nervous systems tend to remain aware during state transitions, and they process emotional material more deeply. They're staying receptive in altered states. Because, let's be honest, your mind doesn't just switch off cleanly. You're able to bridge states. And that bridging allows information to move fluidly between conscious and subconscious layers, which is why rest becomes such a powerful source of clarity. And on a more, I guess you could call it woo-woo note, one of the things that psychics and mediums are really, really good at doing is bridging two layers or multiple layers of consciousness at once. They're receiving information, they're receiving psychic information from the environment or from an object or from the person around them, and they're also able to translate that information to potentially be spoken or written or communicated in some way. So think about that next time, I guess you see or listen to someone who is directly connected into their intuitive intelligence. And as we've already addressed in the last episode of Vagus Nerve Alchemy, your nervous system safety is your gateway to intuition. So here's the distinction that changes everything. Intuitive access during sleep is not about being more gifted. It's about nervous system safety and regulation. Because when the nervous system feels safe enough to release vigilance, deeper perceptual layers become available. And when it doesn't, sleep becomes fragmented, shallow, or restless because the brain prioritizes threat over integration. And so this is why regulation matters so much. It's not to suppress intuition. It's to create the internal conditions where intuition can actually be heard. So let's talk about downloads now, or what people are actually experiencing during these quote-unquote downloads. So when people talk about receiving these downloads, they're usually describing one of three phenomena. First, it could be sudden integrative insight, so where scattered ideas suddenly form a coherent whole. Second, it might be non-linear knowing, so where understanding arrives without a step-by-step reasoning. Or third, it might be symbolic clarity, where an image, phrase, or sensation carries maybe disproportionate meaning. From a neuroscience perspective, this reflects large-scale neural integration, involving the default mode network and hippocampal neocortical communication. I know that's a mouthful. But from an intuitive perspective, it feels like information arriving whole, right? You've heard me say this before in previous episodes. It feels like something's just dropped in. It's the same experience no matter what language you use. So as a highly intuitive or sensitive person, have you ever noticed that your clearest ideas rarely arrive when you force them? They arrive in the shower, on walks, while lying in bed, half asleep, half aware. Or for me, often they'll arrive even when I'm doing the dishes. Not really thinking about anything, just kind of in that open state. So this is state-dependent cognition. And certain forms of intelligence, intuitive, creative, integrative, require reduced frontal control and increased whole brain communication. So for you, rest isn't passive because your mind doesn't stop working. It starts actually working differently. So let's look at cultural conditioning versus intuitive intelligence. We do live in a culture that rewards visible effort, but intuitive intelligence doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to space. And this is why intuitive people often feel conflicted. Because rest feels essential, but guilt creeps in, and productivity feels safer than receptivity. This is, a consequence of the hustle culture that we all find ourselves in, that you have to do more, and that somehow it's not acceptable or it's judged to just be. Yet the more rest is overridden, the quieter intuitive signals become. And not because intuition disappears, but because the channel is so noisy. And now we're back to nervous system regulation. So what's the practical integration? How can we work with altered states? Let's make this practical. Firstly, we need to honor the liminal states, the moments before sleep and after waking, which are so neurologically rich. And instead of reaching for stimulation, like your phone beside your bed, allow images, emotions, or ideas to settle. Secondly, I encourage you to track patterns rather than interpreting literally. So perhaps you could ask, what was the emotional tone? Or how did it leave you feeling emotionally? Is there a theme that keeps repeating? What feels unresolved? Or what feels like it's emerging? And thirdly, I invite you to regulate before rest. A regulated nervous system accesses deeper states more reliably. So this doesn't require rituals. It just requires consistency, gentleness, predictability. And that might be different for everybody. Perhaps that includes having a bath before bed, setting a very clear boundary that you don't touch your phone an hour before you go to sleep, or you don't watch, the news or current world events just before you retire. Choose a practice and stick with it that is calming and regulates your nervous system before you even feel your body landing in your bed. You may also want to use this short guided practice. Now, of course, don't listen to this while you're driving, and don't do this practice while you're driving or operating machinery. So as you settle, just before you're going to bed, bring your awareness to where your body is supported. And you notice the surface beneath you. You notice the weight of your body being held. And you let your breath slow naturally, because you're not trying to sleep. You're just creating permission, creating some space. And you can silently say, I don't need to figure anything out right now. And just allow that to land. And if insight comes, allow it. And if nothing comes, trust that integration is still happening. Because rest knows exactly what it's doing. So by using this short preparation to receive before you go to sleep every night, this may go towards creating that space, that receptivity, and regulating your nervous system. This will help to trust the intelligence of rest, because your intuition doesn't go offline when you rest. As I've already stated, your intelligence, your intuition, it becomes more articulate, because your dreams are not distractions, they're communications. And your nervous system isn't idle during sleep. It's integrating, it's translating, and it's listening. So remember, rest is not the absence of intelligence. It is, in fact, the very environment where higher order intelligence or intuition can finally be heard. And this is where I want to gently connect this conversation to something deeper. Because for many intuitive women specifically, rest, safety, and receptivity aren't just about sleep. They're about receiving in life, including receiving support, abundance, and wealth without strain or self-abandonment. This is exactly what I'm going to be exploring in my upcoming Wealth is My Love Language 4-day activation, where we're going to be working with the nervous system, subconscious safety, and intuitive intelligence to shift how you relate to receiving, financially, energetically, and emotionally. So this activation isn't about hustling harder. It's about allowing wealth to meet you where safety already exists. So if this episode and the previous episodes have resonated with you, this work will feel like a natural next step. The details are coming very soon, but if you would like to sign up and pop your name on the waiting list, you're very welcome to go to the link in the details below and visit my website, intuitionco.com. If this episode has supported you, please do take a moment to like, share, or subscribe, because it genuinely helps this work reach the people who need it most. And if you know someone who lives in their dreams, receives insight through rest, or feels most alive in liminal spaces, please send this episode their way. And until next time, take very good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.